Hi, I'm Effie. This is What Effie Reads, and today I thought I'd have another kind of cozy chat. I've got a cup of coffee in a Christmas mug for some reason, but I've got a cup of coffee, which is kind of funny given what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about, and I don't know the technical term for this genre, but object romances. So I feel like there's been a bit of a boom and a bit of curiosity about this kind of book recently. I've seen a lot of people are reading Unhinged. Previously, I've heard about Stuffed and also Squeak. And honestly, I'm just really intrigued. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I think one of the main reasons that I decided to pick up books in this kind of hyper specific genre is because I saw on Instagram that V. Schwab, my favourite author, had recommended Unhinged to someone, and that just made me all the more curious. Pretty much anytime Schwab recommends a book, it goes way up my list of books that I want to read. So before I get into these books, this video is not going to contain spoilers. I will be roughly outlining the story of each of these, giving my overall kind of thoughts and feelings on them, and also giving a weirdness rating, because when you're talking about people falling in love with doors and pillows and coffee mugs, a weirdness rating is just, it'd be rude not to. So the book that started it all was Unhinged by Vera Valentine, and whilst the name might be unhinged, surprisingly it wasn't that unhinged. Like, it was a little bit weird, but as far as an introduction to this genre, it was actually more tame than I expected. So in this book we're following Tanner, a woman who has a creepy landlord that we know from the start of the book has previously murdered a woman and left her body in the woods outside the housing area that Tanner lives in. This book is told from the perspective of Tanner's front door, who has been watching and admiring her from afar, but also is very concerned about the fact that Tanner's creepy landlord is, well, creeping on her. And through this story we get smart involving Tanner and her front door. It is a little bit more nuanced, and that really surprised me. And there is a Greek mythology element to it. I think all I need to say about that is it involves Zeus, and you can probably possibly guess how Greek mythology comes into play with this book. But overall, I actually had a surprisingly good time, and I quite liked the idea of the front door protecting Tanner from her creepy landlord. So as far as a weirdness rating for this book goes, and bear in mind that these books are, I guess the term is graded on a curve. So yes, every book on this list is weird, but as far as weirdness considering the genre, I would give this book 2 doors with big knobs out of 5. The next book of this kind that I read was Stuffed by Sylvia Morrow. This book follows Anne, who doesn't like people. Like, really doesn't like people and doesn't like to be touched, which absolute mood. And weirdly enough, that was where I struggled with this book, is that I could see a lot of the way that I am in terms of I don't like being touched, I don't like people, but it was almost like it was framed that Anne was weird for not liking people or being touched. When the reader joins this story, there's already a kind of established relationship between Anne and her pillow. She doesn't realise that her pillow is sentient, but she has been known to engage in adult activities involving her pillow. And because we get the pillow's perspective, we know that her pillow really quite enjoys that. I think this book was probably a lot closer to what I was expecting from this genre. And I would say that actually, of all the books that I read of this kind, I think this book's the only one that 100% is kind of exactly what I had expected. And there wasn't much nuance. Essentially, he starts the story as a pillow and he's still a pillow at the end of the story. As far as weirdness rating goes, I think the magical circumstances for the pillow being sentient and also the kink that's involved in this book pushes it up the weirdness rating. So I'm going to have to give it 4 out of 5 murderous pillows. Sap and Spile by Vera Valentine I picked up because I couldn't tell based on the blurb whether it was going to be an object romance or not. It's not, but also I think... Oh, I've lost half my lighting. I'm sorry, I guess we're going to go with half my lighting for the rest of this video. So if we are including Unhinged in this category, I kind of feel like Sap and Spile also is valid. In this story, we are following Mila, who is a woman whose ex-husband dies and leaves her burdened with a maple farm. And one day when trying to collect sap, something like that, she almost dies and she is saved by a tree man. He's a dryad. They're dryads. Called Sia, and taken back to the home that he shares with his, I can't remember the cute name. I want to say it's like tree bonded, but I don't think it is. But essentially his tree life partner, Alsam. And then obviously they have sexy times. None of these books in this hyper specific genre are closed door, except for when they're having sex with doors. But none of these books are closed doors. In fact, they're all incredibly smutty. So there's a lot of smutty Mila and 2 tree men action. In terms of weirdness, I would say this one's actually really low on the weirdness scale. There's a couple of particularly weird moments, one involving a Spile and one involving a bit of a partial transformation. So I'm going to give it 1 sexy tree man out of 5. The next 2 books are part of a megaverse called the Squeakverse, and they are Squeak and Squeal by Vera Valentine. They involve men who were made from balloon animals, and they are Omegaverse stories. I hadn't read an Omegaverse story before, so I was unfamiliar with the terminology. However, I did find that it was actually pretty accessible and I was able to understand, even though I wasn't familiar with things like knotting, but a lot of it linguistically I could pick up on from context. So overall, it was a very enjoyable time. I was a little bit surprised at who was the alpha and who was the omega, but then that could have been because I am not familiar with Omegaverse. I also liked that thematically there was a lot of murder in this kind of genre. In fact, Unhinged, Stuffed, Sap and Spile, and the Squeakverse, I hesitate to call them novellas. None of these books are over 100 pages. But anyway, all of these books contained murder to some degree. And I'm kind of here for it. I'm not gonna lie. There were definitely some weird moments in Squeakverse, particularly involving transformations. But again, overall, like, not terribly weird. I'm gonna say, oh my gosh, I forgot that their cum is different. Same with stuffed, actually, so that bumps up the weirdness. I'm gonna give Squeak 3 balloons expanded for her pleasure out of 5. And as far as Squeal goes, like, it was weird, but just in different ways. So for Squeal, I'm going to give it also 3 out of 5 clowns with Ken doll parts. The one book in this genre that I actually didn't have a good time with, which is surprising to me because honestly, I went into my approaching reading all of these books expecting that I actually wouldn't have a good time. So for me to come away and go, oh yeah, there was only one that wasn't very good, and that is Claimed by the Coffee Mug by Shayla Storm. This one, in terms of weirdness, was not very weird. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. The scenes involving her and the coffee mug, most of them were more voyeuristic than the coffee mug being involved. And because there's not much that can be done with a coffee mug, or at least you'd have to get pretty creative to do much with a coffee mug, it just didn't really work, unfortunately. I also felt a bit like the smut came across as men writing women. I don't know, because obviously the author's name does sound feminine, but pen names exist and I would never assume someone's gender. But in terms of the way the writing came across, it came across like men writing women and wasn't a very enjoyable read. I also thought that the whole kind of backstory about why the coffee mug was a coffee mug was probably the least inspired of all of them. So unfortunately it just didn't work for me. For an actual weirdness rating, it's very hard to put a finger on, because on one hand, she's getting intimate with a coffee mug, but on the other hand, there's some really weird things that go on in books in this genre. So I think I'm gonna land on a 2 cursed coffee mugs out of 5. And the final book that I read in this hyper specific genre was Beached and Breached by Vera Valentine. This one was one of those free short stories that you sign up to an author's newsletter and you get. So I had a really good time with this. Also, I really liked that at the end of the book we had blurbs and snippets from other books in the Valentine verse, I think she's called her, writing world. So I have lots of books added to things that I want to read now because a lot of them sounded really good. So in Beached and Breached, we have a siren, I think he is, a non-binary boat, and a police officer. I mean, I understand why the character is a police officer, but just bear in mind that they are one of the characters in this book. So the majority of this book is just hot and heavy scenes between these 3 characters. It does involve magical dub-con, so be aware of that. And I really appreciated the lore that Vera Valentine created to kind of explain everything that was happening within the book. And it was also probably like quite close to what you would expect when thinking about what an object romance involves, because the boat does not transform. The boat, well, I guess it does in a way. But generally, the boat has some very creative uses for a steering wheel. I bet you can understand what's going on there. So for this one, I'm going to have to give it 5 horny boats out of 5. As for this genre in general, I went into it not knowing anything about these books beyond, oh yeah, I'd heard this one's about a woman having sex with a door. This one involves a woman and a pillow. And I was really pleasantly surprised that there is that more nuance to it. Like, a lot of the time, these objects aren't just magical objects, but they're shifters, or they're cursed, or they're monsters. And I enjoyed all of the magical lore that went into it. And I think there's just such a large degree of creativity that goes into making these books that I really appreciated. And I kind of want to find more, because I had a really good time. And I'm interested to see what authors can come up with, because Unhinged was particularly inspired because the way that double entendres were written into it, with things like knob and wood, was just fantastic. And I'd love to see what people come up with. I think Vera Valentine is kind of the queen of this genre, but I'm definitely open to seeing what other authors do write. I think Sylvia Morrow, once the story got started, wrote a very serviceable story, but Shayla's Storm, I probably wouldn't recommend to anyone. And beyond the really weird smut scenes, it was just generally a bit cheesy and not great, especially if you have read the likes of Unhinged and Stuffed and know just how good this type of book can be. So I guess I'm going to end this video by asking you if you know of any other books in this hyper-specific genre, if you could leave them in the comments down below. But also let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. But until next time, love you all.